The process of concatenative selection synthesis, or CSS, was considered the most effective method of speech synthesis from the late 1990s to the early 2010s. It has also gained the status of golden child in the cultural zeitgeist surrounding singing synthesis, especially due to the proliferation of software like Vocaloid. Up until recently, AI, the process of CSS was used to understand other softwares and methods, even if they were procedurally different. Most people unaffiliated with current methods of speech synthesis might be familiar with the following process. A voice bank is recorded, and each individual diphone is made into a unit. As for what the user does, they might begin by selecting a sound part they want, then dragging that to the pitch they want, do this several times over, and one can replicate singing, alter specific pitches, volumes, and add breaths, and the singing can then become more realistic. A common sentiment previously uttered online is something to the effect of Vocaloid is dead, and will typically use to refer to the community, and often disproven. For example, in under 8 months, Mesmerizer turned the sandy plant to sand. This has some merit in the sense that concatenative singing synthesis has multiple other contenders in the running to replace it as the most effective method of singing synthesis, or rather, methods that already have. The most clear examples are machine learning techniques. In this piece, statistical parametric synthesis will be the focus. There are multiple methods, but for this purpose, those using hidden Markov models, HMMs, will be observed, as well as those using deep neural networks, DNN. And I know that HMM-based synthesis is kind of also older, but I thought it was cool, so that's what I'm talking about. As a note, before I begin the analysis, I will be using the term Vocaloid to refer to both the specific software, but also as a catch-all for all softwares which operate identically, i.e. UTAU. I will specify when software differs in functionality from one another. Additionally, much of this looks at Vocaloid 5 and below, which follow the concatenative method of speech synthesis. Vocaloid 6 uses machine learning. When looking at the overturn of concatenative synthesis, Vocaloid 5 and below will be compared to SPSS-based models, so that's Vocaloid 6 and other singing synthesizers which use that technique. Before breaking down why it is fading out of favor, the process of concatenative synthesis will be explained. Concatenative synthesis is known to be very natural sounding due to having segments recorded from real-life sound units. It is a TTS technique made by concatenating or joining multiple units together. There are 3 main subtypes: diphone selection, unit selection, and domain-specific. Domain-specific uses larger chunks and isn't really used in singing speech synthesis. You might hear it in weather programs or train station announcements. It will not be discussed. A more in-depth look at these systems reveals 2 segments: a target, which is the thing looking to be synthesized, and the units, which are the individual recordings, in most cases either phonemes or diphones, set to best match the target. These units can be called upon either by a unit selection algorithm, which matches the target and the unit, or by manual recall, calling an individual unit to produce the desired sound. Unit selection algorithms select units based on their characteristics, which can either be extracted from the source samples, such as pitch, or assigned to them, for example, instrument class. Transformations can be applied to the unit in order to better match the target. But a larger database means that there will be more samples, which means that there'll probably be a closer match, which will require less transformations. Transformations degrade sound quality, so it's better to use fewer of them. The reason unit selection synthesis is often valued for its accuracy is that many other sound synthesis programs from the time attempted to replicate sound waves, which was more technologically complex than using already existing sound waves. USS, by using real recordings of sound, sidesteps this issue and preserves detail. Furthermore, natural sounding transitions between units can be applied because the context is known. Using crossfades and adjusting parameters such as loudness, tone, and pitch can allow for more realistic tone when singing or speaking through the use of USS. Thinking more critically, the use of synthesis for speech and for singing are fairly different. For speech, the length of each segment is determined by what would allow for the most natural sound and be best for understanding. But for singing synthesis, it is much more complex, as certain units must land on certain beats to keep rhythm. Vocaloid is a concatenative vocal synthesizer consisting of 2 parts, the synthesizer/editor and the libraries, or voice banks. The editor is the part where the theoretical singing is constructed, and the voice banks contain the samples which get placed into the editor. Notes are placed along a piano scroll at controlled pitches where parameters like vibrato, pitch, and gender can be altered. The voice banks consist of several fragments sampled from real people at a controlled pitch. Each combination of phonemes, or diphones, must be recorded in order for a full expression of language. The software alters the pitch, but in order for a more realistic sound, 3 or 4 different pitches are recorded per diphone. The French mathematician Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier came up with the theory that each complex wave is a combination of simpler sine and cosine waves. This is the basis of frequency analysis. When looking at graphs of these periodic functions, we usually think of something like this, which shows how the amplitude, or which is how tall the wave is, varies over time. This is the time domain, because our domain, or x on the graph, is time. How the amplitude varies over various frequencies can also be observed. The graph looks like this. This is called the frequency domain, because the domain is frequency. Vocaloid operates in the frequency domain. The human voice operates in the time domain, but is analyzed in the frequency domain. Signals can be converted between domains using transforms, the best of which is the Fourier transform, named after the aforementioned mathematician. It breaks down a time signal into an integral of sine frequency components that make up the time function. The inverse Fourier transform does the opposite and puts the frequencies into a time signal. The alterations Vocaloid makes to increase realism are applied to already existing sound files. Altering these aspects requires work in the frequency domain, so Vocaloid uses a fast Fourier transform, FFT, in order to modify the sound and then does an inverse, FFT, to return to the time domain and export the vocals. Due to the positives of this model, such as its ability to produce natural sounds, high levels of versatility, and high-quality outputs, concatenative speech synthesis was widely used throughout the 2000s and 2010s. This model has its drawbacks, though. When a specific sound is absent or underrepresented, the overall sound quality lowers. This leads to the need for a large audio database, which requires larger amounts of storage. Larger libraries need more storage, and more realistic sound requires a larger library. This is one way that pre-recorded speech segments limit the complexity of sound. Additionally, this software can only get so realistic, and with new technological developments, especially advancements in machine learning, more realistic sound can be created more easily by using a different model. That model is statistical parametric synthesis, which differs from concatenative synthesis on a fundamental level. Statistical parametric synthesis synthesizes sound by using statistical and/or neural models in order to replicate acoustic features. This allows statistical parametric models to be much more flexible than concatenative methods. A set of similar speech patterns are put in and the average is determined. This is repeated with large amounts of training data until parameters describing statistical characteristics of speech are attained. SPSS models are typically built on a combination of hidden Markov models, HMMs, and Gaussian mixture models, GMMs, for acoustic features, and a vocoder to generate waveforms. I don't know why I wrote typically, that's one way they can be built. A hidden Markov model is a type of Markov model in which observations require a hidden Markov process, X. It also requires that there is a visible process, Y, and the outcome of Y depends on the outcome of X in a way that can be understood. The key goal is to learn about X through one's understanding of Y. A Gaussian mixture model is a statistical model which assumes that all outcomes come from several, or a mixture, of Gaussian distributions, which is your standard bell curve, for which the parameters are unknown. Vocoder is short for voice encoder. Two signals called a modulator and a carrier are combined to create a third signal. The modulator is split into several bands. Each band is then sent to a bandpass filter. The carrier is then sent through the filters, and the filters are adjusted to be like that of the modulator, thus creating sounds similar to the modulator. An acoustic model is used to convert between the linguistic features of the text and the acoustic signal. This is done at a set rate using statistical mapping. The statistical mapping is done using the HMM-GMM model. This model has many benefits in comparison to the concatenative method, most notably in flexibility. Because this model uses parameters to generate speech, altering the characteristics of the product can be done by sampling additional data, changing regression techniques, and modifying specific parameters. This method does have several drawbacks, especially in sound quality. Oversmoothing can lead to a buzzy or muffled sound, and low-quality vocoders can affect the quality of the output. These limitations can be addressed by another method of SPSS, neural networks. Deep neural network statistical parametric synthesis, or DNN SPSS, is one example, as well as recurrent neural network RNN SPSS. Both Synthesizer V, Studio, and Chevio are based on the neural network method of SPSS, so they do have some concatenative techniques as well. Neural networks consist of a series of nodes modeling the human brain, hence the name neural network. They recognize patterns from input data, which can then be mapped to outputs. GANs, or generalized adversarial networks, are a set of neural networks connected such that when one loses, the other wins, have been used to make SPSS models sound more realistic. A 2007 study by Sean Yang et al. Applied GANs to speech synthesis with a generator, G, and a distributor, D. G attempted natural speech, and D compared G's results to real data. D could more easily see where the generated speech differed from the real speech, and that data could then be used to help G better understand the acoustic distribution of real speech. Other studies applied GANs to help with oversmoothing by applying the system to an output, which could then give a more natural quality to the synthesized sample. Some oversmoothing still occurs, and a buzzy quality can be heard in some voice banks, like Coffee or Goofy 6. SynthV uses a combination of SPSS and CSS techniques in order to generate sound. Synthesizer V was developed by Dreamtonics Co. Ltd. And is currently on the third iteration, Synthesizer V Studio 2, released in March of 2025. Chevio refers to the broad range of softwares developed by the Chevio team, offering speech synthesis programs with both speech and singing modes. As technology improved and other synthesizers made use of new TTS methods, Vocaloid made the switch from concatenative speech synthesis to a model using machine learning. Vocaloid 6 used Vocaloid AI to produce sound which is more natural and expressive than that produced by CSS. When Vocaloid announced this, it came as a surprise to many. Little attention was paid to Vocaloid 5, and some had assumed that Yamaha had stopped with Vocaloid entirety. This surprise continued as new voice banks, including Bigfoot, were announced the same day as the new software. Other discourse arose due to Vocaloid 6 using AI tools, with many people wondering if it was ethical. Up until this point, I haven't really discussed what makes a synthesizer auditorily better or worse than other synthesizers. That is because this work is primarily focused on singing synthesizers, and which are primarily used for the sake that they are singing synthesizers, and so the Vocaloid or vsynth community doesn't always hold realism as the high standard. This makes judgment of better synthesizers more difficult than real-life applications where realism is generally the auditory goal. In those applications, the quality of the synthesizer is judged from its output in several domains: intelligibility, or how easily one can understand the generated text; accuracy, how closely it resembles what it is trying to replicate; and naturalness, fairly straightforward. These qualities are determined through a series of subjective and objective measures. One method for determining a software's quality in the aforementioned categories are listening tests, where participants listen to generated speech and rate its qualities. Mean opinion scores, MOS, give a picture of the TTS model's qualities. Comparative mean opinion scores, or CMOS, are used to compare two different TTS models. These tests are generally reliable, but participants can be hard to come by and bias is somewhat rampant, as any test involving real people is. Many objective measures exist to determine TTS quality as well. Word error rate, or WER, is used by transcribing TTS using an automatic speech recognition model, or an ASR model, and comparing the transcription to the original text, looking for accuracy. This also has drawbacks, as the quality of the ASR model has an effect on the word error rate of the text-to-speech model. If a poor ASR model was used, it could raise the word error rate for a higher quality TTS model. Automated algorithmic scores is another method, which use machine learning to predict the MOS scores for models without human inputs. While this sidesteps the issue of finding participants, it has drawbacks, as MOS data from human participants will still contain biases, which then get incorporated into the model. A third measure is speaker similarity scores, which are generated by comparing how closely the generated speech matches the person it is trying to sound like. When developing speech synthesis models, developers commonly use multiple techniques to get a broad picture of their software's quality. I ran a small survey of my own to determine MOS for Vocaloid, SynthV, and as well as human vocals, which I used as the control. I used listening tests to determine intelligibility, accuracy, and naturalness. To test intelligibility, I had participants listen to a sample, rate how intelligible they found it, then transcribe the text. This also gives a way to test accuracy, as I can compare the transcribed text to the actual synthesized text. Another accuracy test was conducted by having participants listen to one sample and rate how accurate it was to the text it was trying to replicate. The test for naturalness was another subjective one, with participants listening to samples and rating how natural they were. I also screened participants for whether or not they regularly listened to vocal synth music. Participants were selected from my school's physics and pre-calc Discord server. When it comes to naturalness, old school Vocaloid received a score of 0.47, Synthesizer V received a score of 0.67, and the control vocals received a score of 0.93. The highest score they could have received was a score of 1. Vocaloid received an intelligibility score of 0.4, Synthesizer V also received an intelligibility score of 0.4, and the control received a score of 0.87. Accuracy was scored through listening tests and transcriptions. Listening tests yielded a score of 0.46 for Vocaloid, with both SynthV and the control receiving scores of 1. The transcript accuracy was as follows. SynthV had a score of 20%, which jumped to 30.1% when removing an outlier. Vocaloid had a score of 10%, which jumped to 15% when excluding the outlier. The control had an accuracy of 92.7%. The error rates were insignificant when put into comparison with what was deemed unintelligible. When it came to Vocaloid and SynthV, more errors came from being able to understand the sample rather than simply misunderstanding it. Listening to vocal synth music did not seem to have an effect on intelligibility or accuracy scores, but might have had an effect on how the participants rated naturalness, with those who reported listening to vsynth music sometimes or often reporting higher naturalness scores for synthesized samples than those who reported listening to it seldom, or never. SynthV can generate vocals which sound more natural and can generate vocals more flexibly than CSS-based models. Additionally, SynthV is less pricey than Vocaloid. Synthesizer V Studio has a starting price of $99 USD. Vocaloid is priced at well over $200 USD before tax. Older Vocaloid, however, still has merit in the sense that the engine creates a certain type of sound, which many Vocaloid producers still might favor. Vocaloid 6 is an improvement by using newer technology, allowing for more natural sound and a broader range of use, but pricing and complaints on sound quality, especially for the Super Pack, still make SynthV a better choice for many. It is important to note that these engines don't automatically attempt to create the most natural, accurate, intelligible, or high-quality sound possible. Many alterations are made by those using the software. This tuning process drastically alters the sound sample, and means that the quality of the sample greatly depends on the skill of the individual using the software. Will Vocaloid ever be replaced? Technologically speaking, yes, it already has. Vocaloid 6 uses AI tools. Newer synthesizers will likely continue using SPSS-based techniques, unless a newer, more effective method comes around, then they might use that. And a return to CSS is unlikely. Despite this, CSS-based systems will continue to exist, and many will remain popular, especially because they're kind of easy to make and somewhat affordable. When it comes to culture, despite the Tedo boom and Synthvi's growing popularity, there are many years of internet and popular culture built on Vocaloid. It is near impossible to say that it will ever be replaced, written off, or forgotten. Furthermore, the VZ community does not exclusively value realism or the most technologically advanced software. No one engine will overtake the others and become the sole software. Instead, newer softwares will give producers more options for how they choose to create their music. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being, I'll put all my sources. I think I actually do have enough to do a little bibliography segment this time, which should be, happening right now. Yeah, thank you. This video is really fun to make. I've been sitting on it for a while. And I would have gone more into depth if I could actually use either software, but as I mentioned with pricing, I would have to be dropping over $300 on the stuff, so I couldn't do that, unfortunately. So this is the best you can get with whatever I could find by scouring the interwebs. Also, I'm not like a professional or anything. This is I'm purely a hobbyist who's interested in this kind of stuff. So if I made any errors or I phrased something incorrectly, please leave a comment letting me know, because I like learning and I would not like to inform others. I would not like to misinform others. Alright, thank you.